I'd like to welcome you all to the Workforce Symposium portion of our agenda. And this morning I'm pleased to have with me a distinguished panel. We have Scott Trent, the Chief Human Resources Officer for Montana Rail Link. We have Eric David, the Director of Human Resources with Town Pump. And Bruce Knudsen, the Executive Vice President with the Montana Automobile Dealers Association. And we talked a little bit as a group earlier, and if we think about this panel, we really have representation really across the entire state in every corner. I guess I'll say my name is Paul Hupfoff. I'm with Montana Dakota Utilities, and I'm a director with the Montana Chamber Board. Yesterday at lunch, Webb provided a terrific segue, I think, that really helped make me think about Workforce Symposium this morning. And he talked about at lunch that across the state of Montana, signs are going up in business windows, but they're not open and closed sign, they're help wanted signs. And it reminded me of a couple of data points that I think really nail this issue in terms of it's important to each and every one of us and across the entire state. Over the next 10 years, it's estimated that 130,000 Montanans will be retiring and leaving the workforce. And when you think about that number, there's only 123,000 Montana citizens that are aged 16 to 24 to fill that vacancy. And that's assuming they all stay in the state. So if we think about this demographic data, it helps support the projection that Montana will be facing an unemployment rate by 2025 of 1.9%. And I need to repeat that, 1.9%. I come from the eastern part of the state where we dipped below 3% during the height of the oil boom, and the challenges with a 2.9 number were unbelievable. So to try to wrap my head around 1.9 is difficult to do. But with that, I'd like to jump right into our panel discussion. We've got 1 hour, and I know that's going to move pretty quick. I'd like to begin by asking all three panelists if they could characterize their workforce, just what they have in terms of numbers, locations, the positions, and then after that characterization, step right into the first question of how would you describe the state of the incoming workers you and your members are seeing? And I'll start with Mr. Trent.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Paul. Paul and I had the pleasure of working together at MDU Resources, or at least in that family of companies, and so I appreciate being on the panel this morning. Just real quickly, for those people who don't know, Montana Rail Link is the 9th largest railroad in the United States, the 2nd largest Class II railroad, and the largest privately owned railroad in the country. We employ about 1,200 employees, and we have stations, of course, all the way spreading from Huntley Project to Sandpoint, Idaho, with 4 major hubs, Livingston, Helena, Missoula, and Laurel Billings. But to go right into Paul's question, what do we see with the current state of employees as we recruit them into our organization? What I can tell you is in large part they're not as prepared as we need them to be, and we're not talking about huge demands as an employer on what we look for with employees. In the end, we look for them to show up, and so we don't need them to be technically skilled. We don't need them to have a particular worldview. We just simply need them to be willing to come to work on time every time we need them to be at work. And so we focus on many strategies to get that accomplished. And I got to tell you, what you're going to hear from me today is going to be very different than when you hear from other employers, because our strategy is very unorthodox. But we don't have a problem getting people, and that's a purposeful construct on our part.
Eric?
Okay, well, thank you. A little bit about Town Pump. We have about 3,300 employees across the state working in 3 divisions. Obviously, everyone has probably seen one of our Town Pump stores. We have just right at 100 stores across the state in 50 communities. We also have 100 casinos, Lucky Lil's, Montana Lil's, Magic Diamond are probably the ones that you may have seen around. And we have 14 hotels across the state. And you may think of in each of those industries that the stereotypical employee is going to be a young individual just out of high school. They're doing something either part-time and new to the workforce, and our average age of employee is about 35 to 40 years old. And we've made we've been feeling that unemployment rate for quite a while, and we have to use or look at different channels of recruiting, looking at non-traditional sources, participating in some of your voc rehab activities to find somebody that just has a couple of hours. They may not be able to do the job the way it's normally done, but by working with them, we find out how can they do this job. I'll say similar to Scott, we're looking for people that are going to show up every day and do the job that we ask them to do. And one thing that we really focus on is we're not looking for somebody that's been doing this job for 5 or 6 years. We're looking for somebody that we can teach them how to do the job, and we have training manuals and training checklists running to 20 or 30 pages for a cashier to teach them all the things they need to know to run the register, to do responsible alcohol sales, to make sure that we have the products on the shelves that they want, things of that nature. So we really have to focus on training the employees or the individuals that we can attract, instead of looking for the perfect candidate or that purple squirrel, as I call them. You're not going to find the purple squirrel out there anymore in a 4% unemployment rate. So.
Thank you. As the Auto Dealers Association guy, I get to hang out with the greatest people in the world. I call them the last great entrepreneurs in the world. I've been with them for 3.5 years. It's been a lot of fun to see what they do in their communities. And this issue is very, very big. When I first got here 3.5 years ago, that was really kind of the first thing that they said is, look, and nationally as well. I mean, it's the same thing. There's over 1 million people that work in auto dealers across the nation. For us, it's about 3,500 to 4,000, depending on what's going on. I have about a little over 100 dealers. Most of those, so about 55% of those, are outside of what I call the metropolitan areas. So if you can imagine Butte being a metropolitan area, outside of that. So it's a very big deal for these small communities. I talk to people all the time. They're very good paying jobs, but it's very, very difficult to find them. There's no question about it. And part of the main thing that we're looking for, technicians is the biggest issue. If anyone has a new car, it takes, I have to get my 14-year-old daughter to figure out how to do some of this stuff once in a while, Bluetooth and all that sort of thing. And finally, I just kind of turn it off because it's too much. And I was in the dentist's office one time, left my car running, and it was hooked up Bluetooth, and the car was close enough. It was really cold, and my 13-year-old daughter was in there, and Joe Billion calls, and it answered because it's in the car. And so it freaked her out a little bit. But these are the things that are really out there. So some dealers, it's to get a technician completely qualified by the manufacturer. The manufacturer has all kinds of qualifications in order to be qualified to do recalls. There's millions and millions of recalls, unfortunately. Some of them are stickers, and some of them are really, really things that really need to be fixed very, very quickly. Some of my dealers pay over $100,000 to keep their people trained, and we don't have any of the training. The manufacturers do not have training programs in our facilities in the state, so it becomes take off from your job, fly them there, pay for their food, and pay for all their travel and all that sort of thing. So this really is a very big burden. So part of what we did, so we started a technician program with the state. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit later. But we also, we were starting with technicians. Obviously, there's car salesmen. There's general managers, sales manager, general sales managers, finance and insurance type folks, office folks, accounting. There's a lot of jobs out there that we certainly need help with.
Thank you. Several comments were made about strategies and some of the challenges that I think lend itself well for this next question. One of the things the Montana Chamber has heard from our members is how hard it is to find workers, and that workers are job hopping more as competition for that talent increases. So what are some of the things that your organization is doing specifically to recruit and retain that talent? Scott?
Thank you, Paul. Pretty simply, we focus on two key areas. On the culture of our business, we want to make sure we're a workplace where people want to come to work and are provided the opportunity to thrive. So we spend a lot of time reinforcing what we want our culture to be as an organization. And secondly, we spend a significant amount of time building what we call an employment brand. And I'm probably the one panelist up here on the table that tells you we don't have an issue with workforce. We have 2 job openings right now for multiple hires, track labor positions that are going to start in March. We're looking for 40 people. We had 586 applicants for those 40 spots. We have 25 switchmen we're going to put on in April, and currently we have over 400 applicants for that job, and it's not closed yet. So what happened before I landed 10 years ago, Montana Rail-Link, has been reinforced by my staff to ensure that we're an employer of choice in our community. We spent a lot of time making sure that Montana Rail-Link is well known. The Washington companies helps out a lot with that, with the philanthropy that happens across this state. The Montana Rail-Link brand you see in sponsorships, in Little League teams and football teams across your communities. You see park equipment going up that has been either donated or funded by Washington companies or Montana Rail-Link. We just simply do a lot of things that create high visibility for our organization. And frankly, we go to career fairs not because we have openings and we have difficulty filling them, but because we want to keep our brand out there. We want to make sure people view us as a very strong alternative to their current employment circumstance. Now, in addition to that, I talked about culture. The culture of Montana Rail-Link I would describe as being fiercely engaged and highly focused. There are 1,200 of us at our railroad, and our job's to do one thing, and that's to take a commodity that has been entrusted to us by a customer and move that from point A to point B as safely and quickly as we can. And that takes team effort and high coordination. And we spend a lot of time doing that. Going back to the first question asked, the one thing that we don't look for are any skills at all with people we hire. That is a fundamental contradiction from an HR point of view. When I was educated to be an HR professional, I was told the KSAs are everything. The knowledge, skills, and abilities they have got to be your focus when you look to staff the organization that you're leading. Well, after a few decades in this profession, I can tell you that we have put, at least organizations I've led this function for, we've pushed the KSAs to the background, and we focus on what I call, and what I think our organization calls, the CVAs. The character, the values, and the attitude of the people we look to hire. We can teach people how to do the job. We can't teach them how to be better people. So we want to make sure a person's character and value system and their attitude is going to drive their behavior in the workplace. That's what we focus on, behavior. And how do we discover what someone's behavior is going to be in our workplace? We demand to talk to whoever they've worked for in the past to tell us what their behavior's been like in the past, because the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. Do they show up on time? Are they cooperative when they're there? Can they communicate effectively? And these skills are essentially social skills, right? They're what people just what they demonstrate in interactions and in their relationships in the workplace. And people who are high relationship, high communication people are very, very successful with this. We look for particular past work histories. If you've not worked for a formal employer, we look for people that grew up on ranches or farms. that we know how to go to work, and they're going to work no matter what. We look for people that have worked in construction, people that have worked fighting fires or in the forestry industry, because again, they know what a hard day's work looks like. And so everything we focus on is about behavior, and we do all of our training inside. We don't rely on any government programs. I serve on the SWIB, the State Workforce Innovation Board, and we do good work on that board. But I have to tell you that we prefer to take a blank slate and train people in the technical skills they're going to need to be successful at work. We've got a lot of patience for people's performance to improve over time. We have no patience for people whose behavior doesn't match our culture, and they don't stay around long.
Great. Thank you. Eric?
Well, Scott, you make it difficult to follow. I'd say we all strive for the problem of not having a bunch of openings that you're trying to recruit from. I would say, in 2007, 2008, Town Pump had a turnover of over 100%, and we did some sort of an analysis of what was causing that, and it really wasn't that we were losing everybody every year, but there were a few positions that were turning over frequently. And we did some research into what was causing it, and not surprisingly, we found out people were not leaving Town Pump. They liked Town Pump. They liked the benefits. They liked the pay they were getting, but they were leaving their supervisor, their manager, or a coworker that was harassing them or giving them grief. So we started focusing a lot of our attentions onto training those supervisors on how to improve, and selecting supervisors not because they've been supervisors before, but because they had the talent of listening, good emotional maturity, some other things, more what I call talents instead of the skills, because we can teach somebody a number of skills. How do you set a schedule? How do you make sure that it's fair to your employees? How do you give constructive feedback? Things of that nature. And we've seen our turnover come down about 20%, and that's saving about $2.3 million a year. And we're continuing down that path. So giving your employees good leadership that's fair, good constructive feedback, setting what's expected of my employee, and if they don't make those expectations, help them improve instead of just saying, well, I'm going to get another one. Okay. So, and also putting in the policies, procedures that reinforce that, so that the manager doesn't feel like they're out there on their own. So that's what we're doing to try to establish that culture that makes us a magnetic employer. People want to come work for us.
So for me, a little bit, thank you. For me, it's a little bit different because I don't actually do the hiring and work with the hiring managers. And I think so from my thought process, the idea for us, we need everybody. But I think when talking with dealers before I came and just in general conversations, even across the country with other auto dealers associations, they have the same issues. We can't find the people that we actually need. Pay. We try to pay as well as we possibly can. There are very good paying jobs in the car industry. I think one of the issues that we have is a lot of times, especially with technicians, and I'll tell you a couple things that we did in just a minute, but the perception out there is that you're lying on the ground in grease and oil, and it really isn't that anymore. It's really all about electronics. That's the biggest thing there is out there. Certainly there's oil changes and there's brakes and all those sort of things, but it's all about electronics. And I think one of the biggest things, as I talk to several dealers, is really a career path. When you talk about the opportunity to move in different places, service managers, general managers, and even the stories, there's probably people in your local cities where you're from, the actual dealer probably started washing cars, and it just starts that way. And I don't think they really mean it that way. I have a 19-year-old son that's selling cars, and he wants to own dealerships. He's seen how it works. And I think that's really part of it. So at the beginning, the idea is we sat down. I just started talking to other auto dealers associations. I was new to the business. You know, what do you do? How do you do it? Turns out there's auto dealers associations out there that have full-time people that do this. Run internship programs. They have an actual person in their association. That's what they do every day for a living. We don't have enough business in our state to do that. But at the same time, I was able to learn a lot about what they do. And we set out 3 things really. And I think the very first thing was to find employees for our dealerships. Obviously, we got to find some people. We got some qualified people. And I think we want to keep good workers in Montana. Everybody wants to stay in Montana. I've only been here 9 years, but man, I wish I'd found it 40 years ago or 50 years ago even. What an amazing place. I can't even imagine the sitting in traffic for 8 years, 44 miles one way in LA that I did. I can't even believe I'd even do that. I can't even deal with traffic at 5 o'clock. So, I mean, it's a weird, you know, true story. When I came here 2008 for my job, first job interview, the gentleman was taking me to the car rental place. He started driving me through the residential area. And, you know, I'd never been to Montana before in my entire life, and I just said, Enterprise Rent-A-Car when they used to be over on Montana. And I said, are you taking me somewhere to kill me? And he said, because it was kind of odd coming from Denver, you know, why are we driving through houses? That's kind of weird. He said, no, I'm trying to beat traffic. I'm like, oh man, okay. So, but we want to keep workers in Montana. You know, my first 3 kids, all 3 of them are gone from Montana. I suspect I have one that wants to come back already. The traffic is killing him as well, and just everything, he wants to come back. And that's really what we want to do. We want to keep the folks in Montana working. But I think one other, and I think this is probably a lot from my thought process, is that if you can get somebody in a great job, you can let them understand the opportunities, and they make that decision, and they get a good job, they get a good career, I think you can change families for generations. And I think that's very, very important. And that's really kind of where we started. I got a call. I was planning on starting the program, or at least getting it started in 17. I got a call from one of the universities in January of 16. And the gentleman said, you know, we'd really like to do this. Somebody said I should give you a call. And I said, well, that was really on my docket for 17. I had a lot of things going on, but let's get it started. So it started out with one email. I sent an email to Jim Edwards, who is probably out riding, well, he's probably not riding his Harley right now, but he's kind of out of the business. And I said, Jim, who do I talk to? And he sent an email to Pamela Busey. And after that, it kind of went crazy. I was really surprised how it worked. I mean, I didn't really know, I was just trying to set up a program with the dealers to where we can just kind of get some people going and just kind of get a little program, you know, and get people know in high schools to, you know, from that perspective. But what happened after that was really amazing to me. And the people that I ended up working with, Kirk Lacey, who was the interim dean at Helena College now, Amy Williams, I saw her come in somewhere. She's over there. She's a car girl too, which is very, very cool. But you know, we started this process. I had people calling me from all over the state saying I want to be part of it. And I won't take a whole bunch of time, but I can't even tell you how amazing what they did. The programs they came up with, it's very, very obvious to me. I lived all over several places in the world in 6 or 7 states doing all kinds of things. I've never really heard anybody say, what can we do? What's best for our state? But to see these people and to get together, we'd be in rooms, and I see people off and on that were in these meetings that I can't remember exactly who they were, that were just there to see exactly what's going on and just really get to where we are. So what we ended up doing, we did a couple things. So we decided we want to get the information to these people. We got to start a lot earlier. So junior high is where we want to start. We haven't got to the junior highs yet, but the high schools we have and the colleges we have. And so one of the very first things that we did, you know, Amy called me and said, well, why don't we have you guys come down to our counseling association? Because I think a lot of times the counselors as well, you know, don't really understand exactly what we do at car dealerships. So we went to their association. We bussed a whole bunch of them over to Joe Billion's place, in Bozeman. Yeah, he gave them a tour, walked around. They were amazed at what was really there and how it really worked. It was totally different. You know, some of them actually wanted a job, I think. They wanted to work there instead. So there's really some good opportunities. One of the you know, I think one of the best things is we had this dynamic where the dealerships would say, well, you know, you teach them, but they get here and they don't really know what we need them to know. And the colleges would say, well, we spend all these time teaching them, and you put them on the lube rack. And so certainly there's a disconnect. This has enabled us to be able to get together with both sides and have great conversations. The dealers obviously bought on. I mean, they're interested in anything that'll bring value to what they're doing. And once we start the process, I think 3 days ago, Amy sent me an email talking about a program where I haven't even had time to really actually look through it a lot with this involved, but a high school program, pre-internship, pre-apprenticeship program for high school students. We're also locally trying to get a high school student from each one of the dealerships. Just get it started, because I think we find when you start going through, you start paying for student loans, you start doing those kinds of things. If they get done and they haven't really worked for you and they don't really understand what it is, the worst possible scenarios when you go through all that stuff and they come in and they go, wow, I don't think I really want to do this. And I have an experience with that. My son did that. He went to work for a dealership in Utah, and he just said, you know, flat rate's not for me, Dad. I want to do something else. Now he runs a ranch, totally different animal. No pun intended, I guess. But life is good there, and I think so. Essentially, what we did, and I'll be quiet for a little while, I think at least, but we built spokes around each one of the colleges that have those programs, and so those universities or colleges, we worked with Miles City, Butte, Helena, and Billings. And so the dealerships around there, we're working with those we're talking about curriculum, what do they need to know? I mean, ultimately they have to be certified by the factory. So it makes it kind of difficult. It's a little bit different if you go into an independent type place, but in order to really do the real work, you have to be certified. And so ultimately what we want to do is to be able to have the Ford, Toyota, Chrysler, all those General Motors in different places where they can actually be certified, at least on a certain level, when they come out.
Thank you. This next question, we may have touched on some of it, but it ties us back to the eggs and issues breakfast. At the last legislative session, we saw the passage of several key workforce training bills, including one focused on apprenticeships and one on dual enrollment. How does the organization work with local workforce development officials to develop workforce needs? And again, some of that might be touched on, but I'll expand upon the question if you wish. Scott?
I think railroads have been way ahead of the curve when it comes to apprenticeships in particular. They've been present in our industry for decades. And so, to give you an example, Montana Rail Link has had apprenticeship programs in all 30 years of existence. It's only been in the last 2 years that we registered them with the state, just simply, I think, primarily because of my work on the SWIB and just the notion that the governor's made it a real priority, you know, with the legislation that passed this past year. And I'm sure Montana Rail Link will be happy to take advantage of the tax breaks that are associated with continued apprenticeships in our workplace. But as I'd mentioned before, you know, our strategy has always been to get good people through the door and then train them how to do the work. So, you know, once people go through an apprenticeship in a railroad like Montana Rail Link, whether it's an electrician apprenticeship, machinist, we have signal apprenticeships as well as Carmen. Once they get their journeyman card, they can take their employment down the road anywhere they want to go and work in a railroad as a journeyman and earn a pretty good living. You know, I see apprenticeships as really important. You know, I certainly can't take any credit for how successful they've been in our industry or even at Montana Rail Link, but they do work. They allow people to learn why they earn a living, and so we think they're a key for others that are having difficulty, in particular, getting qualified workers through the door. The dual enrollment thing just clearly makes sense, you know, as people are earning their education and they have the ambition to take curriculum that's a bit more advanced than what they currently are taking in high school. To be able to get college credit for that at very low cost is just a way of helping someone prepare them for the career track they're going to choose. And so, you know, I think that's been a very, very good thing, and I hope it will continue to be reinforced.
Okay. Well, at Town Pump, a lot of our jobs really don't lend itself to a apprenticeship type model. But we do work with our local job service employer committees and the local job service centers around the state to help them understand who we're looking for, so that when they have somebody come through the door, they can say, well, here's, you know, this might be a good fit for you or not, or guide them someplace else if they know that they won't be a good fit for Town Pump. We also have some in our corporate office. We have a fairly large information technology team, and we're working with Montana Tech to have some internships with them, and have hired several tech graduates directly as an intern into a regular employment. And we have a very more internal training and development focus, instead of looking at the state to provide the basic skills that we need. I would say the frustration is somebody new to the workforce that didn't learn in high school that you're supposed to show up every day, supposed to show up on time, and you're not supposed to spend all day on your phone. So.
So I think I talked a lot about this with this one back there, but in my last response, dual enrollment, once again, they came out with a full-blown program. I was absolutely amazed what Kirk and Amy came up with, and there's a lot of other people obviously involved. I just can't remember all their names. It used to crack me up. We'd go to these meetings, and there's all these education people in a meeting, and half the time I couldn't understand what they were talking about because all this jargon that they used. But the program is amazing, and I think one of the biggest pieces as we do this dual enrollment and we start bringing them in at the very, very beginning and they get credit, is that not only will the dealership be able to see whether or not there's somebody they can actually invest all the money that they're going to have to keep them for a long, long time and actually get them qualified, but the person can actually see what the situation is there and understand whether or not, I mean, it gives them an opportunity to commit to what they're doing, because you become a part of the family. You know, in my travels all over the state, you know, I call it love. I don't know what else to call it, but I feel lots of love in the dealerships because it's a family, and there's so many people who have been there such a long time. There's a lot of managers that own part of the business. I mean, it's just a natural thing to me, at least, and I think that piece of it helps both of the parties get together and really make it a long-term. You haven't really accomplished much if you're working with somebody for 2 or 3 years on an internship program or an apprenticeship program, and they decide when they graduate to go do something else. And that, for us, it is going to work very, very well.
Thank you. There seems to be a trend where we're seeing more people entering the workforce at a later age than previous generations. And this topic comes up frequently in discussions that I'm part of, and it's a concern that employers are seeing really a critical lack of soft skills, and just curious if you're seeing that, and if so, what are you doing about it?
Want me to go again?
You bet.
You bet. Well, the quick answer to that is yes. It's a troubling trend, and I guess I don't want to step on any toes, but I have to attribute that back to initially to the family. There are a lot of things that influence that. We see in the workplace, you know, in an age where the ability to communicate with people through so many means is so prevalent, the lost art seems to be just simply the ability to relate to one another face to face. And so it's, you know, there are different ways to communicate, as we all know: email, texting, leaving voicemails, a ton of non-intimate ways to communicate, but they don't build relationships in any way, shape, or form, and there's no syntax to to the print people see in emails or texts, so you can't understand the emotion that's maybe potentially being conveyed, and it gets misconstrued. But we view the relationship in our workplace as just that, a relationship. And so the question becomes, what kind of relationship do you want? If you think of marriage as an analogy, there are a lot of people that are married. There are some people who would describe their relationships as being okay. There are a lot of people that probably say their relationships are good. But every once in a while you encounter somebody and you see that their relationship is great. The two of them are in sync, they communicate well, they know what each other are thinking, and the same thing can be true in the workplace. But you have to be able to demonstrate that you care about people, and we spend a lot of time with leadership development in order to get there. You know, and in the end, we believe leadership at Montana Rail Link, it really comes down to two parts of one equation, and it's half about what you can accomplish, because a leader without accomplishment doesn't really get anything done, right? But it's equally about how you conduct yourself in the workplace. And so you either reinforce your leadership skills and abilities and perception with every action you take at work and away from work, or you erode it, one of the two. But from our standpoint, we see that you know, parents are coddling their children, you know, and they're in the home, you know, way later than they should be. And maybe I'm the wrong person to ask. I got married at 17, had 3 kids by the time I was 21, and you know, once I got married, it was up to me to do whatever I was going to do. What I can tell you is we have a philosophy for hiring at Montana Rail Link that has been developed over the course of my career, and we call it hire hard, manage easy. And the notion of that is that the more difficult you make the process for someone to join your family, the easier it's going to be to manage and lead them in the workplace. So our due diligence process is deep. We do the things that you normally would do, but we run a background check on people. We check their DMV record. Well, you might say, why do we do that? Why is somebody's driving record important to us? Because it's a predictor of their willingness to follow rules and be safe. And our stuff's big, and when it moves, it's not going to stop until it wreaks havoc, unless you control the movement of it. We talk to, you know, the traditional application says put down some personal references, right? Well, if you can't find 3 living people to say something good about you, you're not alive, right? So we don't care about that, honestly. We want to talk to the last 2 or 3 supervisors somebody's worked for and ask them point blank, what are we getting? And we find a safe way for employers to tell us the truth. We also employ a very lengthy, and it does vary based on union craft, and like I said, 90% of our workforce is involved in 1 of 9 unions, probationary periods. And so, you know, that's the honeymoon, right? You get to see the best of what you're going to get during that probationary period, and we spend a lot of time debating whether we convert someone to regular full-time employment before that probation's up. If in any point in time you have to scratch your head, or I talk to people that are running departments for our company and I say, are you going to convert them to regular full-time employment? If I don't get an immediate and resounding yes, then my counsel to them is the answer is no. If you've got to think about it, the answer is no. Because once they're on board, we own them. We get them. So, as I said, you know, some of what we do is very unorthodox. Interview questions from us can be really strange. For example, one of our interview questions is, I'm getting ready to put a lacrosse team on the field. How many players am I sending out? Most people in this room, unless you played lacrosse, probably don't know how many people are on each team. But you know what the answer we want to hear? Unless somebody knows the exact number of players, we want to hear, I don't know. Because we want people to be able to tell us when they don't know something. Truth is really important to us. The quickest way out of our organization is 2 pathways. Be unsafe and be dishonest and untruthful. Because trust is the key to long-term relationships, both in work and away from work, right? So that's what we focus on.
When you talk about soft skills in the way that you asked it, and I guess part of my previous comments made me think that when I look around the room and I see a lot of gray hair, gray beards, etc., and it's, we're really talking, dancing around the millennial issue. And I recently read an article in Entrepreneur magazine that said the 11 reasons that managers terminate millennials. And I started looking at them, and they were looking at lack of vision, miscommunication, anxiety or depression, lack of confidence and overconfidence. And I said, I've been terminating people for 30 years for these same things. So are they really that different? They have different experiences. They grew up with different methods of research. I mean, I did my first research paper in a library looking at books, right? Right now, that'd be lost if you said you can't use the internet to get there, right? So look at what their experiences are, and then how do I craft my communications, my messages to relate to them, and to relate to, the Gen X, Gen Y, and everyone else who may need to use different language for that, may need to use different methods, but they're the product of what was going on when they were young. And the experiences of 9/11 to them were very different than they were to you and I. They were younger, different type of catastrophe. But they had not been through the Kennedy assassination and other, the Challenger disaster. Those are the things that probably shaped most of the people in this room. But a lot of our younger workforce didn't have those experiences, so we need to relate to what were the things that were important to them, what was the society like when they were going to school, and learn how to talk on their level. So I see the soft skills as much we need to learn how to interpret how they're behaving, and if we need them to behave differently, we need to tell them that. And we don't have to give them a trophy and then tell them how to do something else. We can have a face-to-face conversation. That scares the heck out of them, to have to sit down and talk to somebody face-to-face. But in my industry, that's what it's all about, because they're going to sit across the counter talking to a customer, and their customers are going to be that entire dynamic of very young to very old.
So, Eric, the expectation on my part is a trophy, even though I'm not the best up here. But I think, from our standpoint, when you use the word millennial, I believe I have 3 of them. And 3 out of my 4 children are millennials, I believe. And there's the thought process is certainly different. We talk a lot about in the car industry, not only to have them working in our dealerships, but also buying cars, because they think completely different. And so, but at the same time, I told my son the other day, I said, go print this out and hand it to me. And he looked at me like I was crazy, and I realized that we don't have a printer in our house. And he just texted to me. I do use a printer at work, but they're definitely different. I think, at the same as, the conversation up till now, you just have to find someone that can actually do work. It's really a good person that understands. I will say this though, some of their wants and desires and values in work are much different than probably mine, certainly mine, and others. When they're working, what time they're working. Dealerships run 6 days a week and have crazy hours and different things, work Saturdays and those kinds of things. And so I do know that there are dealerships that have changed up some of those things, but a lot of it is just really on-the-job training. For a dealership, certainly the dealer's not planning on being there for only a little bit of time, unless he's been doing it for 30 or 40 years, usually. Dealership has only been doing it for 6 or 7 years and gets out. I'm not sure I've ever heard of that. And so it's a long term for him. or her, and there's probably a next generation dealer somewhere in the family maybe, or there's a manager. I just think once there's a long term, I mean, and that's probably one of the difficult pieces, but once you can find somebody, you know, treat them right and actually show them where you're headed, you know, pay them well, have them part of the conversation, have them be a part of what, you know, once they have a piece of the pie, and you certainly can't do that for everybody, but I think everybody can feel a part of the team. There is no question about that piece. And I just think once, you know, on-the-job training is really probably the most important piece, and they start moving and doing different things and learning as they show up, and you know, the lot manager and then washing cars or whatever, and they learn that there's something else there, and they learn how to do it, and they do a piece of it, and they go to a training class and something like that. But I think for us, I think it's a lot of molding that person, finding a good person, and then molding it into what you kind of need, and showing them the vision, and then having them be a part of the family.
Thank you.
Also point out that the Minova Mills are currently half of our current workforce. So if you're not going to embrace them and find out how to use them and provide the opportunities for advancement that they appreciate, may not be the same career path you took, but if you don't provide that opportunity for them, they're going to go find somebody that will. And that's one thing that they've shown that they are very adept at.
It's a good point. Looking at just demographics, that gets overlooked in the sense that we talk a lot about the baby boomer generation in terms of its just size. The reality is the millennial generation is actually larger than the boomer generation. Unfortunately for us, the X generation's in the middle, and they're not sufficient in numbers, so there's a bit of a gap. But we've got about 10 minutes left, and I guess I'd like to go across the panel and just ask for any closing remarks. And outside of the workforce topic, I've put no boundaries on your response. Mr. Trent?
Okay, what would be the last comments I'd like to make? Well, I think a lot of what we've been talking about today is, you know, for us, those of us sitting at the table here represent a fairly significant organization size-wise, you know, comparative to a very small employer. And so some of what we're talking about may be more difficult for a very small employer to utilize to address, you know, to work well at ensuring they get the right people through the door and on their team. And so, you know, that would be, people would have to think long and hard about how to be creative. I think that's probably really important. I do know as a large organization, and you know, it's too bad some of the people that weren't here for the first session aren't still here, because I think there were some from the legislature here. I'd like to tell them that you know, we don't rely on the state legislature to pass bills or do anything to help us be successful as an organization. In fact, some of what you heard from Senator Sales and Representative Hertz, as a for-profit business, I can tell you, you know, that thinking is in line with ours. We view the world in pretty simplistic terms. For-profit business loves simplicity. And for goodness sakes, serving on a couple of boards at the state level, what I can tell you is government loves complexity, and it boggles my mind how complex simple processes can be made. And the complexity is not good in my mind. There are too many, for example, on the federal grant that we get from for workforce development, you know, too often some of that money is used for state employment purposes rather than getting down to the people who need their skills to be improved to go out and get a job where they can make a living, get a CDL, for example, or get welding skills. And the money needs to trickle down to where it's going to have an impact. And I fight at every SWIB meeting to ensure that people quit fighting over the money and get it down to where it needs to go. But from a workplace development point of view, what I can tell you is, again, you know, culture is important. Having leaders on your team that know how to interact with people and inspire them and improve them through coaching and mentoring is really key. My favorite leadership author is John Maxwell, and he says this, it's my favorite leadership quote. It says, people don't know how much, or don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And again, I had mentioned it, we view the employment relationship as just that, a relationship. It's a caring relationship for the 1,200 people that work on our railroad. And we foster that, we guard it. And when people come into our culture and they don't fit, we ensure that they don't stay around long. You have to decide what the heck you're here to do as an organization, and Montana RailLink is very, very clear on what our vision is, what our mission is, and we align the employment side of our business to reinforce that. Look, real quickly, and I'll be done. As for-profit business really has 4 pathways to develop a strategic advantage, right? Think along these lines with me. The first might be the composition of your business model. And Starbucks took the coffee experience to a different level in our culture. The problem with having a unique business model is it can be copied pretty easy. And so you see Lou's Caboose and the Coffee Brothers and the Beanery and all the other places that have looked at that model and copied it. So that strategic advantage was gone. The next one was technology, but unfortunately, whoever's selling you technology is selling it to your competitor, so you may not be able to sustain that very long. And the same thing used to be true, and it has been true over the last decade, with the cost of capital. When it comes to being able to get a loan or get money to expand your company, that's pretty much been a low price for many, many years, so that's been gone. I have to believe, and this will be my ending comment, that the only sustainable competitive advantage a company can have is to have the best people. We think we have 1,200 of the best workers in Montana working for Montana RailLink. That is a purposeful action on our part, and we think there is nothing more important day in and day out at our railroad than deciding who's going to be on our team and who is not. There is nothing more important to us. So we spend a lot of time doing that, and we make sure that either myself or somebody else on my team is involved in every one of those interviews. We treat every candidate who comes through the door like gold. We want to make sure that experience for them, I call it enhancing the candidate experience. We want to make sure they feel like a VIP when they're on location, because we want them when they leave to want to come to work for us even more than when they were there. And then we get to choose from that group who we want to put on our team. We think we're choosing well. Thanks. Thank you.
When it comes to workforce development or developing your own workforce, once you've treated the candidate well and hired what you think is the right person, you really need to look at making sure that you provide the training to develop the skills that they need to do the job. And Peter Capelli is a professor of management at the University of Pennsylvania, and he wrote an article on the job training and training programs why most companies were cut during the Great Recession, and most of them haven't come back. So if you're looking for your competitor to train your next employee, you're probably going to be disappointed. So would highly recommend that you look at developing the training that you need for your employees. They will appreciate that, and they'll show that by sticking around longer. And finally, we can talk about what we've done to develop and maintain our workforce, but I thought it'd be beneficial to really wrap up. You have to do workforce planning for your business, and you can wrap it up in 4 easy steps. One is you need to analyze what is your supply currently. What are the numbers of people, the skills that they need, what are the demographics of your current workforce, and then what's the demand? What am I going to change in my business, add new product lines, build new locations, whatever that is, and look at your business goals and what's the future workforce changes. So that will help you establish what are the gaps between what I have and what I'm going to need, and then say put a business plan together. How do I fill that gap? Do some brainstorming and come up with a plan and then execute that plan. So, but you have to do it for your business. We can't do it for you. And that's not what we expect. I don't expect the government to tell us how to do that because they don't know my business. So.
So in my situation is different in the sense that my job is to just help with the pipeline as opposed to actual doing the hiring. But I think the most important piece is really figure out what you really need and what you want, and use the resources that are out there. And for us, there's a lot of state resources, all the universities, all the colleges. Everyone out there wants to be a part of it. You know, when I first made that phone call, it was just bizarre how I remember a conversation with one of the college guys. He gave me a call, and I apologized for how long it was taking. And he says, "Bruce, come on, man, this is lightning speed compared to what I normally get going." So it was a really interesting dynamic. But I just find out, you know, Amy will be on. You know, I sound like this never-ending plug for them, but I can't even tell you how well good a job they did. And I think there's just a lot of opportunity out there that we probably haven't seen that. She'll be here. You know, Kirk Lacey's very, very busy, but if you call me, I'll give you a whole bunch of other people that do apprenticeship. They have people that do this for full time and really do a very good job. But I think finding the right piece. My job is to get the pipeline going. We hope to have 30 to 40 people in the program. We hope to have 2 or 3 in some dealerships that are offset by a year or so, depending on what they want to do. This is the very first time, just this semester, we're getting them in. And quite honestly, we couldn't have too many in because we wanted to make sure it was very successful and it made complete sense and we weren't overwhelmed. But you have, you know, everybody wants people to find jobs when they get out of school. Everybody wants to have, the dealers want to have people to work. So it's a win-win situation. My advice would be to find out what we have out there and use it to your advantage.
Well, I want to thank all of you for participating this morning. I think my challenge is going to be, I wrote a lot of notes up here, and I'm not sure they're legible right now, but I need to translate them when we're done. But thank you again, and I'd like to thank all of you for participating in your attendance as well. And we'll take a break until 10:30 and reconvene with our second workforce panel.